malfunctioning! What? I have to go reverse the polarity of the neutron flow! Wait, the apartment's been a TARDIS this whole time? Of course. How else do you think we fit all these personas in here? Go on, you know what to do. What are you talking about? The apartment's a TARDIS? Damn it. I'm talking about Doctor Who.
Mexico, we work.
What time is it, kids?
A honeymooner!
We're terribly happy to have all of you with us.
Editing man, a little help? Thank you. Well, I suppose I can't talk about storytelling in television without talking about the longest-running television program the BBC produced, Doctor Who. Well, I mean, I suppose I still could not talk about it, but then I'd never hear the end of it, so whatever. For those of you who've heard all the Doctor Who jargon on Tumblr and on YouTube and wherever and have no idea what Doctor Who actually is, Doctor Who is a British sci-fi television program about a time-traveling alien and his various companions and their adventures through time and space. The show is now celebrating its 50th anniversary. What's that? The anniversary was 2 months ago? Where were we? Oh, right, real life. Well, at least we're in time for the Regeneration scene, right? That was last month? Anyway, better late than never. The show's been on for a long time, and as is true for any show that's had a pretty long run, it has undergone a number of changes over the years in order to suit its ever-evolving audience. In fact, in many ways, the very nature of the show is changeable. The Doctor is able to change his appearance and personality, companions come and go, and even the TARDIS changes its interior design from time to time. So it's really kind of hard to pinpoint what Doctor Who is all about, since at any given time it's been about different things. So maybe the best way to start is to look at the changes that the show has undergone over the years. And I'm not just talking about the Doctors and his various regenerations and the various companions and all that sort of thing. If you are more interested in that, I'm sure there are tons of videos on YouTube that you could watch. This review, however, is going to look at the overall tone of the show. In order to look at that, we have to look at the individuals who have at one time or another found themselves at the head of producing this show. While there are a number of people who can hold that distinction, we're going to specifically look at the 9 original producers of the classic series and the 2 faces that most people associate with running the new series of Doctor Who. So, let's start from the beginning, November 23rd, 1963. The original idea behind Doctor Who was more of an educational program, with audiences traveling with this crotchety old man and his various companions, at first his granddaughter and 2 school teachers, through adventures in the past and in the future. In the past episodes, they would learn about history, and in the future episodes, they would learn about science and possibilities, and in both sorts of episodes, they would learn how to imagine a different sort of people, whether are people from history or a different alien race, more complexly. It wasn't an idea that had a lot of hope going for it. In fact, a lot of people predicted that it would tank after the first season, but the show's first producer, Verity Lambert, made sure that this wouldn't be the case. She approved the script that introduced the Daleks into the series, and they proved to be a very popular villain and still remain very popular to this day. It solidified the show's popularity as a sci-fi program, and gradually they steered away from their educational roots and started to focus more on sci-fi adventure. After a successful 2-year run, Lambert stepped down as producer, not because she didn't enjoy producing the show, but because she felt it was time for a fresh perspective on Doctor Who, a show of humility that you don't really see from a lot of television producers. John Wiles, Lambert's successor, wanted to take the show in a new direction, wanted to make the tone darker and focus more on the sci-fi adventure aspect of the show, but he ran into resistance from 2 sources: the higher-ups at the BBC and William Hartnell, the first Doctor. Hartnell felt as the sole remaining member of the original crew that it was his job to safeguard the values that Doctor Who was supposed to stand for. Because of this, and because of Hartnell's failing health and the difficulties that was causing with the shooting schedules, one of the changes Wiles wanted to make was to replace him as the Doctor. Now, if you're going to lose an actor in a television series, you usually do one of two things. You either write the character out of the story in some creative way, or you replace the actor with someone who looks almost exactly like the actor and hope that he does a good enough job playing the character that the audiences are willing to suspend their disbelief. Obviously, there was no writing the title character out of the series, and Wiles wanted to replace William Hartnell with another actor who would play pretty much the exact same character. But his superiors thought that this was a bad idea and vetoed that suggestion, leaving Wiles to resign as producer in frustration after less than a season. Wiles was replaced by Innes Lloyd, and his elevation to the producership also coincided with the change in the BBC higher-ups, and the new people were more than willing to allow Lloyd to replace Hartnell, provided that he could A, convince Hartnell to leave, and B, find some creative way of writing the character out. Lloyd was able to convince Hartnell that his failing health was not really up to maintaining the rigorous shooting schedule, and he, along with the script editor, was able to come up with a very creative way of replacing him. They reasoned that since the Doctor was an alien, who the audience really didn't know that much about, they could invent an aspect of his physiology where he would change his appearance and his personality when he was nearing death. This process, at the time called renewal, would eventually come to be known as regeneration, and it would be one of the major trademarks of the show. So at the end of William Hartnell's last story, the Doctor collapses, having said earlier in the story that his body was wearing a bit thin, and the audiences got to watch him transform into Patrick Troughton. And because Patrick Troughton was a much younger Doctor, he was able to do more of the physical aspects of the show and take more of an active role in the events. The show completely abandoned its educational roots and became much darker, more of a monster of the week style of program with many thrills and scares. But Patrick Troughton, with his goofy grin and his lighthearted manner, was able to maintain an aspect of humor with the show as well. Peter Bryant succeeded Innes Lloyd after 2 years, and he oversaw the end of Patrick Troughton's run as the Doctor. And in consultation with the next producer, Derek Sherwin, he cast the third aspect of the Doctor, Jon Pertwee. Though Sherwin has one of the shortest tenures of any producer of Doctor Who, he did oversee one of the biggest transitions in the show's history. With ratings falling and people becoming less and less interested in the very, very expensive science fiction aspects of the show, Sherwin felt it was time to ground Doctor Who. Literally and figuratively. In Troughton's final episode, the leaders of the Doctor's race, the Time Lords, finally catch up with the Doctor, who has been breaking one of their long-standing and biggest rules against interference in other races' affairs. His punishment is twofold: exile to planet Earth and the inability to travel through time, and a new face. The Time Lords send him to Earth, force regeneration on him, and in the next season, in color now, Jon Pertwee emerges from the TARDIS. Sherwin also established UNIT, the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, as a sort of military base that the Doctor could work with. Over the next few seasons, the Doctor stayed in then present-day Earth, working with UNIT, and grounding the show in a sense of reality that fans gravitated towards. After one episode in the newly revamped series, Derek Sherwin left the reins of producing to Barry Letts, who would produce the show for the next 5 years. The show now had a more family feel to it, both on and off stage. Jon Pertwee's version of the Doctor developed a very paternal relationship with his various companions, and when he gained his ability to time travel back and his exile was lifted, he still stuck around on Earth for a fair amount of time. Pertwee proved to be a very popular Doctor, and the show did very well during this time, which also featured the 10th anniversary episode of Doctor Who, with cameos from both Patrick Troughton and William Hartnell. Barry Letts stuck around through the end of Jon Pertwee's run of the Doctor, and into the first episode of the new Doctor, Tom Baker. To date, the longest-running Doctor at 7 years, and arguably the most famous face of the classic series. The fourth Doctor had no desire to be tied down to UNIT or by the Time Lords or anyone at all. He wanted to go off gallivanting through the universe all by himself. Well, with his companions, of course. So, as Philip Hinchcliffe took the producing reins from Barry Letts, the show's tone changed yet again. Hinchcliffe produced Doctor Who at its peak, with some of the most popular episodes coming out at this time, and with ratings at an all-time high. He was inspired by a great deal of Hammer horror films, and so we see some horror villains making appearances in this part of the show. And while the darker turn of the show was very popular with fans, it wasn't quite as popular with many critics who felt that the show was too scary and traumatizing for young children. So it was that when Philip Hinchcliffe left the show with very high ratings and was succeeded by Graham Williams, Williams was strongly encouraged by the BBC to lighten the tone a little bit and to tone down the violence. While ratings remained fairly healthy, Williams became increasingly frustrated that he couldn't take the show in the direction he wanted to take it, and it didn't help that Tom Baker continued to exert his enormous influence on the show. After he left, Tom Baker's final year as the Doctor was overseen by the show's longest-running producer at 9 years, John Nathan Turner. Turner produced the show from this point until its cancellation in 1989, and he felt, not unjustly, that people really weren't taking Doctor Who seriously anymore. So he decided it was time to completely overhaul the tone of the show. Much of the humor was removed, a lot of the violence came back. His first season was actually a series of episodes connected by the theme of death and decay, so the show took a much darker turn. Turner also reintroduced a lot of the old classic villains, but he didn't like using the old crew of Doctor Who, the old writers and directors. He only kept a few of them. And the writers he did have found it increasingly difficult to reintroduce some of these villains that he wanted to reintroduce. After Tom Baker's final season, Turner oversaw the casting of the next 3 Doctors: Peter Davison, Colin Baker, and Sylvester McCoy. And you can always tell when an episode of Doctor Who has been produced by Turner. Why? Because there are question marks on the costumes. Yeah, one of Turner's trademark changes was to introduce question marks onto the Doctor's costume. I think he was the only one who actually liked them. The show also started to become more focused on the character of the Doctor himself, focusing on what a centuries-old alien must be going through. Though Turner was initially well received and he was able to extend the show's influence to other countries, including the United States, the ratings started to take a downward turn. Many blame this on the casting of Colin Baker as the 6th Doctor, a very brash and often rude Doctor that people couldn't relate to very easily. Many blame it on the writing and directing, particularly how gruesomely violent Colin Baker's first season as the Doctor was. And many blame it on Turner himself and his introducing too many gimmicks into the show and his unwillingness to allow old Doctor Who people to work on the show. In all likelihood, it was a combination of all these things, and it certainly didn't help that the guy in charge of the channel that Doctor Who was on at the time hated Doctor Who and wanted to get rid of it. The only thing stopping him from getting rid of it was the incredible fan support. He did actually try to cancel it at one point, but they brought it back. Eventually, in 2005, the show was successfully relaunched with the new Doctor, played by Chris Eccleston, a new companion, and a brand new series of adventures overseen by Russell T Davies. The show existed in the same universe as the classic series and had roughly the same premise, only now the Doctor is the last of his race, with the Time Lords having been wiped out in the Great Time War with the Daleks. The show continued to explore the character of the Doctor himself while still keeping the show grounded in the canon of the classic series, and every season had an overarching storyline of some sort. Cryptic references to overarching storylines would be subtly inserted into various episodes and then explained in later ones. After a successful 4.5 season run, Russell T Davies stepped down as showrunner and handed the reins over to Stephen Moffat, who continues to run the show today. Fans have very mixed feelings towards Moffat, recognizing his skill as an episode writer, but not quite sure about his skill as a showrunner. He's been criticized for, among other things, his tendency to introduce drama into the characters' lives without actually developing character, the numerous plot holes in his storylines, and his tendency to be a little bit too in-your-face with the references to the overarching storyline. For all that, though, one thing that you can say about Moffat is he has a great deal of respect for the classic era of Doctor Who, and he's more than willing to make fun of his own weaknesses as a writer. And if you don't believe me, I suggest that you check out the minisode that Peter Davison wrote called The Five-ish Doctors, which Moffat not only granted his approval to Davison to do, but also gave him a budget and a film crew and actually appeared in it. So over the course of 50 years, the show has undergone a great many changes, but given not only the show's lengthy run, but also just the nature of the show in general, that's not at all surprising. Doctor Who has always been a show about change. The Doctor would change, the companions would change, and thus, the stories would change. And I don't think it's entirely unreasonable to look at a good show and say, okay, we've had a good run doing it this way, but what if we tried it a different way? Sure, you might alienate some die-hard fans, but you might also welcome some new fans into the fold, and honestly, who are we to say what the right way is to run a show? The show has had a lot of input from a lot of people over a lot of years, and hopefully it will continue to evolve in the future. So it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to say that a show has to be loyal to one particular vision. If you don't like the show as it is right now, then there's plenty of Doctor Who that's been collected over the years for you to read, watch, listen to, and enjoy. Find a version that works for you. Well, there's quite a lot more that I could talk about with the show, but I think we'll leave it here for now. And so until next time... What the... Arcana? It's alright, E.T., I've got the TARDIS under control. Great, but what happened to the apartment? Weren't you paying attention, E.T.? It's a TARDIS. It can change its interior and exterior appearance. And I thought, quite frankly, we could benefit from an apartment that was bigger, cleaner, and actually, you know, up to the health code. I suppose can't argue with that. This is a lot nicer. Yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna go check on the engines. Yeah, you do that, Arcana. I'm gonna go make a sandwich.